What is up, fellow sickos? I am Dan Valley coming at you, as always, with my certified fantabulous co-host, Mr. Grant Hughes. It's that time of year. We're just going to talk. We're going to break down some of the latest 2025 NBA trade deadline rumors, as well as some news, just to play catch up on some stuff that we've recently missed or deemed noteworthy. Bigger announcement, though, before we get started. Grant and I kept our pre-podcast vamping to like 20 minutes today, which is, I would say, about a third of what we've been going lately. Do you feel more energetic to now do the actual podcast that you've just exponentially cut down how much that we were talking and critically thinking before we hopped on?
Don't you assume that 40 minutes we didn't take up will just get inserted into the actual recorded portion of our conversation? I feel like that hour is going to get eaten up one way or the other.
What tangents can these rumors that we've missed out catch
we'll
us up
see.
on?
We'll see how punchy it gets.
How quickly will this be dated? There's also the other question here.
Yeah, you're more well. I feel like I don't think it's going to be too dated. Like we're going to talk about Jimmy Butler at some point, which I may have just ruined anyway. So
you might even be, if you're listening to this on audio, you will probably hear about Jimmy Butler at the end. If you're watching on YouTube, go check out our separate video on Jimmy Butler that I'm probably just going to put out immediately because he is actually fun and well, I'll save it for them. But okay. What have you made, just very quickly before we just kind of dig into it? Have you made anything? Do you find like this year's rumor mill is happening, but do you find it repetitive and stale more so than other years? I just feel like we had this conversation when we were doing our trade deadline big board and our why aren't these players on the market? It just feels like we're recycling the same like 3 to 5 names.
I think it's definitely true that's what's happening right now. I can't remember last week. So it's hard for me to say like, oh, it's different than last year or the year before. Cause to me, it always kind of feels like that where we're waiting for, we have a handful of names and then we're waiting for maybe some late additions or some developments that like increase the pool of players we're talking about this time of year. So I don't know. Do you think I get the way you're asking the question. It does seem like you think this is different than years past in terms of like just scarcity of people to talk about.
Yeah. I don't know why I feel that way, because you're right to an extent that it is always like last year it was OG and Pascal Siakam, and that was basically kind of it. So it's on the same trajectory. And we've had now in a couple seasons, like last year we got Siakam and OG were traded like pretty well before the deadline. And then this year we had the Schroeder trade, we had the DFS trade. And now we have the Jimmy Butler trade request, and there's the stuff going on with De'Aaron Fox. So maybe it should technically be more expansive, but I guess what's interested or disappointed me the most is I don't think we've had a like surprise seller or buyer sort of emerge, or even a plurality of it to where, okay, you could say the Kings, maybe they're going to be a surprise seller, but we don't think that even as they sit in 12th in the West. And not that that's a bummer, but it just makes for a repetitive discussion, I think, a lot of the time, which is why parsing through the rumor mill was like, okay, with the stuff we're going to cover, maybe we've heard some of it before, but we were trying to focus on things that were a little bit more novel.
Well, why do you think that is? Why do you think you have that feeling this year? Is it like parody, or is it any of the other stuff that we've thrown out about like what's different under the new CBA?
If I believed it was parody, I would fave it because I love the idea of, and I think there's a ton of parody right now. I really do think whether you believe that the new collective bargaining agreement has accelerated the neutering of the transaction market, or if you just think that teams are still taking some time to kind of figure out what they're going to do. It's one or the other, but I really do think that that's the biggest offshoot right now. And it's even the amount of people that we talk to, like smart people who cover this for a living and are way more nuanced about the CBA and stuff, the degree to which they're still trying to figure things out almost terrifies me a little bit, because it's just everyone's now making mistakes, which is, I don't understand. It was convoluted to begin with in the sense of, well, if you're a team that has a certain amount of salary, you're going to have to factor in this player's bonus coming in. So he's technically accounting for more money than outgoing. And they've made it even more convoluted. And there are a lot of smart people working in the league, and maybe they'll figure it out, and maybe we'll get fireworks by the trade deadline. But like these big time trades, I almost feel like they're done in the red. Like Jimmy Butler probably gets moved, but like a De'Aaron Fox type situation, I just find it very hard to believe something like that gets remedied mid. Like, remember when Anthony Davis requested a trade in the middle of the season and eventually didn't get moved? But I'm wondering, it feels like that's what we're dealing with, but do you think that I'm just kind of sensationalizing the currency of it all?
No, I mean, I think there's definitely something happening, but you got to weigh it against we're still a month out from the deadline. And even in years where the deadline has been insane, there's been that like January and, the first few days of February, right, just right up to the deadline, always feel like, well, is anything going to happen? And then, we've had years where in the 2 hours around the deadline, it's just chaos where everything's happening and all the talk about like, wow, it seems like it's going to be quiet or there's only a couple teams that are it just that so that's like always on the table, I think. But so that's what you're weighing against the feeling that I kind of share that really like other than I guess Butler and Fox, the guys we've been talking about and everybody's been talking about in terms of trade candidates and teams that might make trades are like exactly the same as they were in August or whatever. You know what I mean? Like when we were doing a bunch of preseason centered thinking, you would have pegged the Nets as a team that's going to trade guys, right? And like that's just been true the whole time. And like, well, the Bulls are going to try to move LaVine. Like he's been a guy we've talked about for months, and there's just not that many new additions other than the prominent ones we've highlighted. So like that is a real thing. I think maybe the difference is it's been the same names since before the season started, and that's not always the case. It seems like the names we fixate on in other like pre-deadline years, some of them or more of them emerge like during the year when this team went sideways and they got to rebuild. Like it's just been the same stuff since the summer, and maybe that's part of like why it feels that way.
With the exception of Fox,
Fox and Butler. I mean, Butler even was someone you could look at. Like I don't know, 1 year left.
So maybe it'll still be chaotic, but the chaos feels a little bit more predictable. I think with kind of each passing year is maybe what it is. And also the thing we didn't mention, like how much do injuries have to do with this? Like is Philly less likely to be aggressive this year? The same with Orlando. I think you could even make the case Memphis, like kind of just the way they went about the Dorian Finney-Smith negotiations, just kind of like they've been banged up. Yeah, they're super deep and they didn't know about the John Morant injury necessarily at the time, but there's probably just a layer of skepticism among teams like that where it's, well, even OKC, they're not a team that I necessarily should think would make a trade, but they just have this all-star who's sitting on the bench and has only played a handful of games this year. Why would you make any of these major moves when you're either one, worried about your team staying healthy, or you're still trying to get really critical information about your team as currently constructed?
Yeah, that's definitely part of it too. Because you look the teams. Yeah, no, I think that's a good thing to point out. I don't know. It's always like a combination of factors. And again, we may get to the first week of February and things really start to pop off, and then the deadline is shockingly active. We'll see. But I think you're right. And now that we've talked about it, I do think you're right that there does feel like there's something different this time. It's just like it can't be a coincidence. We got a new CBA. Like everybody's still trying to figure out like how to
McCollum's fault. That's what everybody says. Is that
pretty much.
We begin. I was about to say as always, but that's just not true. We begin with Cam Johnson updates. I'll take this one. Cam Johnson's market is heating up, Grant, per ESPN's Brian Windhorst. Execs around the league apparently expect Brooklyn will get more than one first if they move him. I don't know if that means 2 firsts or if they think that they want to take back bad money or if they'll get a prospect. There were rumblings, though. This is per Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype at the G League Showcase that OKC is interested in Cam Johnson. Not necessarily a new team linked to him, but like having the Thunder formally linked to him, that is a little bit new. They never let anything leak, though, so you got to take that with a dose of skepticism. The Kings, we'll have more on them later, but they've been consistently interested, per Sam Amick of The Athletic. And the Lakers have also registered interest, but they are currently prioritizing Jonas Valanciunas because obviously. And Johnson, for just some notes on him, he has 2 years and $43.5 million left on his deal after this one. And he also did in Thursday night's game turn his ankle at the end of it. He was on crutches, but per Brian Lewis of the New York Post, x-rays came back negative. And so I would still circle him as a name to watch.
Yeah. And if anything, I think the injury just like we probably won't see him before the deadline. If it's, if it's like a 2 to 4 week ankle sprain, which maybe it's not even that bad. It's hard to tell with the information we have, but that's one where it's like the Nets should just not play him for several reasons. Like not the least of which being they will lose more if they don't play him. But yeah, I don't know. Of those 3 teams, the Thunder, the Kings, and the Lakers, do you like or love the fit on any of them for Cam Johnson? Which is weird because the theory of him is he's a value add no matter what.
I think Yeah, he's a universal fit, so you don't hate the idea, but I don't know that let's use Sacramento as an example. He's not going to be the acquisition that just turns around their season. And if you're looking at their season through a lens of a singular acquisition, I mean, then you're thinking more of a nuclear trade. And so I just don't. If I'm the Kings as of right now, you can't trade this year's first round picks. You're trading a conditional 2027 first round pick, and then what? Because that's not the only, like in the Trey Lyles and Kevin Huerter, that's not going to get it done. There's going to have to be other stuff included. But he does fit on all these teams. I mean, are you a little, I would almost rule the Lakers. They acquired Dorian Finney-Smith, and it feels like they might have expanded that deal at the time if they were going to get Cam Johnson as well. And if the Nets want more than one first round pick, the Lakers, I mean, you're not giving up both of your distant first round picks to get Cam Johnson.
Yeah, and so that leaves the Thunder, which is like, yeah, you would love to have a dead eye, high volume catch and shoot guy on that team, and they just can easily have the best offer if they want to. I don't know if what do you think about the Thunder fit? To me, that's like of the options, that's pretty clearly the best. But even then, it's like, I mean, do they? I don't know that they feel like they need to do that or anything close to it.
I don't think they should feel like they need to do that, but I think, look, the framework there is Ousmane Dieng, and then Aaron Wiggins or Isaiah Joe, and those two are trade eligible on January 15th. If you're the Thunder, are you doing Aaron Wiggins and Ousmane Dieng for Cam Johnson?
Yeah, I think I do. If it cost me additionally 2 firsts, probably not.
No, if you're attaching more than 1 first to that, it has to be a hard no. I might be way too high on Aaron Wiggins, to be clear. I think we've established that on this podcast. But I don't know. It's just so tough because, okay, so if you're getting Cam Johnson, do you assume that they're viewing him as someone who would be, if not a go-to member, a candidate to close with them?
I mean, that's the thing, is that's such a high bar to clear. We've talked about that. I would view him more as like, he can just occupy the Aaron Wiggins slot, very different players, but like give him 30% more minutes than you were giving Wiggins or something like that. So I guess the answer is no. I don't think he just suddenly is a closer. But you could, though, if you believe you've got sufficient defense from your other positions, which probably you do, the value of him around Shea driving, like clearing even more space for him, I mean, there could be some real returns there. So I don't think you definitely close with him, but at least, we're at the point with the Thunder where they're so good. It's just talking about like, well, what if he just gives them an option they didn't have before that they use in like game 4 of a playoff series to swing it like that? That could be worth it to a team like them. And by the way, like I balked at, if it's 2 firsts, I don't think I do it. If there's any team that can just throw an extra first in there and not miss it, it's obviously them, right? So like 2 firsts for them is different than 1 for a lot of teams.
So if it was 2 of you, let's just say the 2 worst firsts that they own, which is probably their own.
Probably.
And then like what though? Because if you're giving, the thing with them is I know not all their players are playing enough, but they're still good players. Mm-hmm. And then I run into it. So if you're getting Cam Johnson for Ousmane Dieng plus a rotation player, are you just playing Cam? Like, let's use Aaron Wiggins as the example. That's 20 minutes a game that you could find. Where are the rest coming from? Is it okay by AJ Mitchell or Kenrich Williams? Yeah, or maybe less of Isaiah Joe at that point. And then it's, well, then did you neuter the value of, an Isaiah Joe specific? It's weird because they're so good. And I do think they probably could use what Cam Johnson does, but it's weird because I'm not advocating against them acquiring someone who needs to be a part of their closing lineup, but I almost feel like if they're going to do something that requires more than first round equity, because I guess what I'm getting at is nothing in terms of player salary that they're including, I view as throwaway. Maybe Ousmane Dieng at this point, sure, but you don't view Lou Dort or Aaron Wiggins or Isaiah Joe as throwaway salary, right? Like those deals for Joe and Wiggins specifically are really good.
They are. I think everything's sort of different though, that like the evaluation process for the Thunder feels different because like Wiggins and Joe would be like heavy minute rotation players for 26 other teams, probably like 27 maybe. And so it's like, that's the value of those guys to other teams. Their value to the Thunder just isn't the same because they're not at that level. So like I almost think you have to view values in a hypothetical trade like this, like relatively, because like I said, Johnson might be someone that, Dort's gone cold in this playoff series. And by the way, I'm only going to talk about the Thunder in playoff series terms because like the regular season is done as far as they're concerned. Like we've seen enough. So
there's not, maybe Dallas in a 7-game series, and we did see it last year, to be fair. I look at the West right now, and what team has convinced you that they can touch OKC with a 10-foot pole?
No, that's absolutely right. So that's why we have to talk about them in these terms. And it's like, I don't think Joe or Wiggins are guys that against the best, like they could swing a playoff series if I don't know, I'm trying to think of past examples where like Joe has 2 games where he's like 7 of 9 from 3 or something. He like Terrence Mann's against the Jazz just has like one of those games and you win the series for that reason. I don't think that's going to happen at the higher levels of the postseason, whereas Johnson might just be consistently good enough at giving you spacing that he does like have a meaningful impact, or I think he's just more likely to have a meaningful impact on a playoff series, probably. And so for the Thunder, that's like the answer of to the should we trade him for him or not question. If it's like, yeah, he might swing game 4 in the second round, like then you should do it probably. You know what I mean? Like that's reductive, but I feel like their analysis just has to be pretty different than a lot of other teams.
Is there any other team of ones that aren't mentioned? I know the Warriors, there's been reports that they were, at least they've looked at him, but are there any kind of off the beaten track teams that you think should be in on Cam Johnson?
I think you just got to look for teams that need shooting. And so that would leave you with the Houstons and Orlandos and whatever's, even though like positionally, that's not neither of those teams are like, oh, we need a combo forward. Like we're set in both of those locations. I'm trying to think who, like Minnesota needs more spacing. We'll talk about some of that shortly. It's got to be a good team. It's got to be a team with playoff aspirations, I think, because Cam Johnson's on the Nets right now. They don't view him as a building block. So any other bad team that he went to, that would be the same case, right?
Yeah, Denver would be interesting, but them just getting there is probably going to cost. You're giving up a distant conditional first round pick and then probably have to give up Julian Strother as well. And the machinations behind that are so complex.
I mean, slotting him into the MPJ role and just reducing the cost of that role has some appeal because you're getting 85-90% of MPJ in Cam Johnson at like what, half the cost basically.
So then if you're Denver, you're doing part of the value of giving up a young kid and a distant first. But if you're the Nets, is that like, if you're the Nets, I actually probably would do that deal if you can figure out the math.
Right.
That feels rich, but you're not doing, would you do it for MPJ and the pick alone? You're not doing it for MPJ alone, right?
I don't think so. I think you're going to need a pick because MPJ does make a lot of money and they do have free agency aspirations. It seems like, or maybe they don't care. If they don't care about being the only team with $40 million to spend, like, which given the free agents that are available, I get it. But yeah, I think there'd be appeal there.
I do have a question about the Nets through this lens. So I'll get to that in a second. What about Memphis? Did you mention them?
No, I think that's another one. Just more spacing, more shooting would be nice.
If you're Brooklyn though, I don't think is there an urgency to move him? You're officially bad enough now, right? So you don't need to look at this and say, well, we need to get even worse because he's probably not going to ruin your tank next season. And I would argue with 2 years left on his deal, you're not going to get exponentially more for him right now with, let's say, 2.5 seasons less as opposed to 2 or 1.5 seasons than you would. And I almost wonder, what if you are bad enough next season, but you see the outlines of a good team and you have all this cap flexibility and you know you're going to be welcoming in 2 high lottery picks? He is someone who, yes, he's older, but he could streamline the offensive process for everybody because what he's best at, not as much as a motion shooter as some other guys, but he's best at spacing the floor.
Yeah, I think that's probably right about the urgency. Like, yeah, he's not, especially if he's going to miss however much time with his ankle. And then like, he's very much a dependent. I don't mean that in a super negative way, but it's like, he's not getting you 3 wins that you otherwise wouldn't have gotten because of the lack of talent around him. But like, yeah, it would be a very different conversation next year when you're trading for a year and a half of him versus just like the rental where now we're like 3 years down the timeline. So I think that's right. And it may just be the case where teams clear their books a little better or like just have a better sense of how to maneuver in this CBA. And by next year, your options are just way wider for like where you could send him. And then the offers maybe get better than that. But if you can get 2 first for him right now, I think you should expect to not do better than that as you move forward.
Well, hold on. What about Pacome Dadier, Tyler Kolek, and that Washington first that probably won't be a first round pick?
I mean, if Tyler Kolek had 36 points in both of the games he played yesterday,
2 days. Yeah, that's legit.
That's pretty impressive. Doubleheader for anybody that isn't up on the Tyler Kolek news. He 36 in a G League game and then played 12 minutes for the Knicks that night.
He doesn't get his own segment. I apologize, Knicks fans. I actually want to ask you this because I was talking about it to myself following the Dorian Finney-Smith trade. Do you make anything of the Nets trades so far have required them to take back zero long-term money? It was something I circled, like put a pin in to watch to say, are they trying to be like, get aggressive or funky with their cap space over the summer? And I think this player, Cam Johnson specifically, would be the good barometer for that, because if they wind up moving him and it's for either a cheaper contract or another expiring contract, I'm going to start looking at them and be like, all right, what is happening this summer that you didn't take back any long-term money?
Yeah, I think that's something to keep an eye on for sure. I think the Schroeder, certainly the Schroeder trade, I think was made at least with some part of it was motivated by, we got to start losing some games and let's get rid of like the only ball handler we have, or offensive initiator we have that's not Cam Thomas, who was hurt anyway when the trade went down. I think that was part of it, and DFS probably had some of that involved, because normally, why wouldn't you wait till the deadline on any of those guys? So that the timing, I think it has to do with trying to lose games and maximize the value of that 25 pick they got back. But they're already among the precious. They are already pegged as the team that's got the most cap space, right? Like 40 million plus. Yeah, nobody else has that much.
What else are you trying to do?
I mean, Sean Marks loves to have 2 max slots. We know that. Like that's.
They can get to 75 now because of getting rid of Dorian Finney-Smith's player option, if they, depending on where draft picks land that they own. So like, if they took back, it's just something I don't expect them to be prioritizing cap space, but if they don't take back real money in a Cam Johnson deal, there's going to be that meme face like, hey, what's going on here? Like something's going on here.
So they got the 26 back too, right? So this should be a 2-year thing. Otherwise, what?
Right. But do they view it as, do they just anticipate? Could they be trying to read the market and say there are going to be some teams who are going to give up some batshit wild stuff to get off of bad contracts this summer? Right. I assumed we would get there at some point. This summer felt a little quick, but again, depending on how Brooklyn acts at the trade deadline, it's just something I'm kind of monitoring.
You've just sold me on that idea. That's the smartest route, right? Let's be the dumping ground for a year or two. Like we'll take Zion, like whatever,
and don't jump the market like the Pistons did this past summer, where they like basically gave up something to take on Tim Hardaway Jr.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way to look at it. We should move on. That's a lot of Nets talk, although they warranted it. We've gone on here to the Chicago Bulls, mostly Zach LaVine centered here. The framework, this is per Mike Scotto of Hoops Hype. The framework of an MPJ and Zeke Naji for LaVine swap is not gaining any traction. Can you believe it? For Scotto. The Bulls don't want Zeke Naji's deal. Neither do the Nuggets. The Nuggets. Do you like when I just editorialize on your notes?
I love it.
All this time on. The Nuggets are worried about defense and don't have the draft equity to send Naji somewhere else. So it's just kind of, we don't want him, you take him, stuck type of situation. So which, if any, team should actually be going after LaVine? Like where, if you had to guess, is he going to wind up? And is there a stronger chance he doesn't get moved? So that may be illustrative of what you're talking about at the top of like, there's just a general chilling, even among the names that have been there all season. Like it's crazy to me that there is a chance LaVine doesn't move, and it'll be for reasons beyond the Bulls being stupid about stuff like this. It'll be because like the offers, like teams are just afraid of the years and dollars. And it's not how it used to be. It feels like, so I don't know how you want to jump into either of those questions, but maybe just go with the first ones. Like if not Denver, since that seems to not be going anywhere, who should be like on the phone with Chicago for LaVine?
I want to know, I'm curious what the asking price would be, because depending on what it is, especially, and we're going to talk about him in a minute, following the Jaden Ivey catastrophic leg injury, like I liked Zach LaVine in Detroit before. Mm-hmm. I like him even more now there. Mm-hmm. I'm not giving, if I'm Detroit though, like the deal needs to get done. I'm not giving up any of my own although, I mean, their first round pick, what is it protected for this year going to Minnesota? Like that thing might convey, right? Or is it still lottery protected? But like they're not.
I can't remember, but the Pistons are like a real team now. Like they're going to hover around 500. I think
it's top 13 protected. So I mean, okay. I wouldn't necessarily put, but like next year it's top 11. That thing might convey. So, but you can't trade that pick anyway. So if I'm Detroit, I'm not trading my own first round pick because now it has to be in 2027 or later at this moment conditionally.
Yeah.
And I'm not, but if you can figure it out with just money and giving up, it's probably too early to say in a Sarr Thompson or a Ron Holland. And then like the Jaden Ivey of it all is just, but if you can do it and it's not costing you wholesale assets, if that's still the asking price for Zach LaVine, I love him in Detroit. I don't know how you feel about that.
I do. I wouldn't have felt that way, until maybe a month or 6 weeks ago when it became clear that the Pistons are like going to be, the maybe a play-in team, maybe not, but like the days of them being just like a total, like, I'm never going to believe in this team, thing. Cause these guys are also like, we're a little bit past that. So, and then he does provide exactly what we all have always wanted and support players on Detroit, especially given like, if you're going to keep Holland, Thompson, all these guys, like you better find shooting in anybody you bring in. So yeah, I do like him there. I mean, then because other than them who are like kind of interesting, it's all the usual suspects. It's like we just Orlando or just whoever you think.
I wish Orlando. I don't even consider them because of how much money he makes, but they feel like, is that the team he would go to and it would force you to kind of recalibrate their situation the most, or does the Franz Wagner and Paolo Banchero of it all still?
No, I think he adds exactly like he adds a type of shooter and secondary creator that you have to account for. And they just kind of beyond Franz and Paolo are great. And then Suggs is like trying to get into that role. Didn't he just get hurt too? Or maybe we'll talk about that.
Everybody's getting hurt.
Yeah. But I think he brings something that they just do not have. And I think that's, the cost is probably prohibitive, considering how expensive this roster is like shaping up to be with Franz, Suggs, and Paolo's deals. But yeah, I like him there. I don't know where else I like him much. Actually, like the Warriors couldn't do it without, throwing in Wiggins and or Kuminga and some other stuff. Like, but I think the fit there is good because Buddy Hield is terrible now. It's just suddenly not useful as a shooter. I don't know. Do you have anybody else for LaVine?
No, I guess that's he's not their player. I probably wouldn't mind him and might actively advocate for him to go to San Antonio. If you were able to get off the Zach Collins deal as part of that, and then you have Keldon Johnson, and what is it? I can't imagine it would cost you a ton in player or pick equity.
Yeah, I like him there. Not as much as somebody else we'll talk about, but yeah, I don't know.
What about I mean, are they still? Yeah, they have room, so they can aggregate now, right? Or no, are the Timberwolves still over the second apron? I'm going to look that up very quickly, but oh yeah, they are. Look at that. They're well into the second apron. Why did I just ask that question?
Because the CBA is confusing.
Braveheart, but he'd be fun on there. Just can we review the Karl Anthony Towns trade, but it's Zach LaVine going back instead.
Send him back, yeah. What about just the odds, like that he's not moved? That he finishes the season on the Bulls?
One, I think it's more likely, not only because the Bulls, I think when you look at their record, at least like they've played better than we expected. But now I'm wondering, how does the Jimmy Butler of it all impact? There are different players, and you could get Zach out, but can you get Zach LaVine for cheaper? I honestly don't know what the value of either of those guys is, but I'm wondering now if there's been, you could argue, well, DFS is off the board, Schroeder's off the board. If we don't think the Nets are going to trade Cam Johnson, like Zach LaVine arguably becomes the biggest prize. We don't expect, but there's also Ingram out there and the Zion of it all. I wonder if, I think we all agree the Bulls probably waited too long to do this, but like he's semi-rebooted his value, and I kind of wonder if the Bulls have still waited too long to make a move here.
Yeah, that's interesting because trading him now seems like his value should be higher than it was, well, certainly than it was a year ago or any time between now and then. But like, so the thing that bothers me or it gives me concerns is it could almost be the right decision to not trade LaVine at this before this deadline, except because it's the Bulls and because they have made the wrong decision in basically the same circumstances several years in a row. Like it feels like you almost have to trade him, even if, like we've just spent time talking about, there is like some justification for not moving him because the offers just aren't going to be good enough and he's good now. And like a team might want him more next year when there's less time left on the deal. It would just feel really, you couldn't, if you're a Bulls fan, there's no scenario where you feel great about not trading LaVine because of all the baggage, right?
Do you still, we did like him previously on the Lakers, but
Yeah. Oh yeah.
You still do. Even part of the thought process was you have that D'Angelo Russell salary anchor. And so now it's, well, what do you need to attach to Gabe Vincent and Jared Vanderbilt and Rui Hachimura? And I think I would argue that those are all three deals that are not viewed very highly around the league. Rui might be net neutral.
Maybe. Yeah.
So, like, are you giving up a distant first round pick and all of that salary? And you can include more if you need to get. I probably would. I'm not gonna lie. Like, I've entered my like nostalgic for LeBron era. I'm not ready for him to leave, and I want to see him playing meaningful games.
Yeah, that, and I think the whole idea, like, that this gets applied to the Warriors a lot with Steph, of just like, you have to do it now because the future's, who knows. With LeBron and AD, like, I think it's just very clear that the Lakers aren't going to ever move those guys, and so that's your team, that's your core, because you don't get a choice because they're super expensive. You can't just be like, well, they'll be our third and fourth options 5 years from, like, no. So I think LaVine just really helps them, I think, especially with, if Austin Reeves really can just be a point guard, which I kind of like, I don't know, the results have been pretty good so far to my eye, then just having another ace shooter, and then you're still like a pretty big team. I don't think you can keep Rui in this deal realistically, but yeah, I like the fit there. I think that's a good fit.
I think I'm out. I could see, we were just talking about what are they going to do with all this cap space. If the Bulls get to a point where they're looking to get off the money, and the Nets are just sitting there knowing that Zach LaVine is not going to drive too much winning, and it's, well, now we have Zach LaVine moving forward, 2 top lottery picks, and still probably a bunch of flexibility. I'd be curious, just depending on how much cap space they end up with this summer, if he's still there. And my final question is, LaVine on a different team after the trade deadline, yes or no?
I think yes. It's just, even though we've just said why not, I feel like they just have to move him. They can't do this again.
The Dallas Mavericks, not so much trade rumors, unless you want to use injury talk to spur said trade rumors, but Luka Doncic, as everyone should already know, will be reevaluated at the end of January after suffering a left calf strain. However, PJ Washington suffered a right knee sprain in Wednesday's loss to the Rockets. I don't believe we've seen a concrete timeline for his return pending. Dallas does have a minus 2.9 net rating with both of these guys off the court. They're in the 59th percentile in offense and 34th percentile in defense. However, their most used lineup without them, Kyrie, Dinwiddie, Grimes, Najee, and Derek Lively, is a plus 24.9 per 100. And 3 of the top 4 lineups without these guys are net positives. Do you have any concerns about the Mavericks relative to just, other teams have had worse injury luck. Let me be clear. Like, Luka's been banged up this year. We've seen some other people miss time. Do you have any concerns about them?
I think my only concern, and this will dodge the question a little bit, I guess the short answer of like how they're going to, not in terms of what's this mean for them? Like, will they be okay? Or like, does it matter if they lose 60% of the games that Luka's out? Like, I don't think so. The only concern I have is like calf injury. He's probably not running for a month. And then, I think you made the good point of maybe this gets him fresh for the playoffs if he's worn down from over the summer and just he tends to break down. So that might be a blessing in disguise. But like, I do have concerns that he's going to come back, not be in any kind of shape. And that brings injury risk back into the equation right away because you're not in shape. There'll be a long ramp up. So maybe if you're concerned that they're not going to play well without him, even though I think Kyrie has been so good that they'll be fine or more than fine, the concern would be like, oh, it's okay, he'll be back or reevaluated at the end of January. Maybe he's back maybe he's back, by the trade deadline, but then he's going to have a ramp up. And so like the Luka-less stretch is much longer than the timeline we're actually talking about. But other than like some, catastrophizing about like, well, just physically, I don't like how he's going to look for the rest of the year in the playoffs. Nothing here seems like a red flag to me. What about you?
No, I'm not worried. And I don't think I have seen some people talk about how this might accelerate their ambitions on the trade market. Christian Clark of The Athletic reported that they're interested in adding an impact wing defender. We kind of talked about that already, that should be their goals. Can you, there's Klay Thompson and Najee Marshall and Quentin Grimes. Can you get like a better blend of size, defense, and shooting out of one? Not necessarily a better player. Mm-hmm. I don't think that does that heighten this urgent? I guess it depends on the prognosis for PJ Washington, which we technically still don't have. But the Mavericks are one of the things we talked about before the season, and we were wondering if it was going to work in the middle of the season based on the way rotations were being won, but it's panned out. one of their biggest strengths is their depth. And so I think as long as Kyrie, we know he's back, as long as like they're going to be like, if Kyrie, like if another major injury happens to a Derek Lively or a Kyrie, I'm not wishing that upon anything, then maybe we could talk, but I can't bring myself to sound any sort of alarm bell here. I think that they are still, even with this trajectory, if you want to be a little bit worried about Luka and you hit all the necessary notes, sure, they're still to me like the clear second best team, maybe with between them and Memphis in the West.
Yeah, they feel like they're good. We've kind of been on the kick of like they're just good enough. Like they have as good as a shot as anybody at beating the Thunder, which like you said, they've already done that. It's a little different this year, but still, yeah, I don't feel like there's a lot of urgency there. Your best player being hurt's not good. That can wreck a season. But
aggregate it. Grant Hughes of Bleacher Report says losing your best player is not a good thing.
It's bad.
Ooh,
all right, on to the Pistons. Bummer. Jaden Ivey left Wednesday's game on a stretcher. It turned out to be a broken fibula. Just like bad luck. I know people, I don't know, I didn't see this specifically, but anytime a guy's legs get, dived into, I think Cole Anthony just slipped. I think even in the reporting, it wasn't a Matthew Dellavedova, like, I'm trying to think who. It's really just him that gets nailed for that kind of thing. Grayson Allen. It wasn't like any of the like really reckless dives. So put that aside. So for Ivey's portion of it, this is from Luka Ciafer. I'm sure I'm not saying that last name right.
That seemed pretty, like, are you two homies? It seemed pretty smooth as you were.
I said it confidently, which is what you should do when you're not sure. Did you get this on Twitter? Just one of the Twitter injury doctors.
Skeeted it.
Yeah, got it. So luckily, says a broken fibula is much less severe than a broken tibia or shin bone. Fibula is mostly non-weight bearing structure that primarily is for muscle attachment. Ivy will still miss significant time, but the injury could have been much worse. You see this in football a lot too, where it's like, it's better that it's a broken bone than like a bunch of ligament damage and stuff. Like I thought it was his knee for when I saw the replay of it. So like, I don't know if you can call that glass half full. We don't know how much time he's going to miss. It may be a lot of the season or all of it potentially. But in some ways,
shocked if we saw him again before next year.
I guess the broken bone thing though just does seem guys bounce back from that stuff. I mean, Paul George is a great example. I don't know if he's
younger than Paul George was at the time for sure, right?
I think so, but not by a ton because that was like what 2014 maybe when Paul George did it.
Yeah, that was a while ago.
I think might have been. I think it was whatever. He was in his early to mid 20s, I think. So, but yeah, huge bummer. Ivy was a guy we talked about as one of the most improved players this year, just having the best season, was shooting the ball, best season of his career, shooting the ball great. Bummer for the Pistons. Like that's just all there is to it.
You were spot on about the Paul George time. August 2014 is when he suffered that with Team USA. Yeah, I mean, he's young enough, so hopefully he'll bounce back. I've been all over the place with his fit and whether they should have him around long term, but it was cool to you saw at least the pathway to him working long term, which is something you struggled to do the past 2 years. So,
or just being a good NBA guard, like that was in doubt. I think like, okay, Ivy's gonna stick, he's gonna have a career, and he's probably gonna be a starter, for a good chunk of it. And that was not a given like a year ago.
We move on, no natural segue to that, but Golden State Warriors trade targets. Will Grant care about this at all? Is the real question. Stephen Curry, though, did call the team just very average after they lost to the Cavs. But per Mike Scotto of Hoops Hype, the team is still trying to capitalize on his window because they are liars. Targets that they're reportedly monitoring, Grant: Jimmy Butler, Brandon Ingram, Nikola Vucevic, Kyle Kuzma, Cam Johnson, Zach LaVine. No new names there. Their top target is seemingly Butler. Is that the right call? Do any of these names do it for you? And do you believe that the Dubs are still trying to capitalize on Stephen Curry's window?
I think they are, but not at the cost of recklessness, because I'm just going to hem and haw. I think so. Like, I guess of the names we have here, Butler is the guy that you could argue makes the most sense, because he does a lot of what they need as a main offensive engine. The fact that he said he's opting out means you are renting him, and who knows how he's going to hold up physically. Who knows if Steph and Draymond hold up physically. So you're really gambling on this season on Butler making you good enough to do whatever it is you need to do relative to Steph Curry's like window, right? And I'm not convinced that Butler gets them where they need to be to justify losing Wiggins and or Kuminga. And you see trades that involve 2 firsts, like a 25 and a 27 first, Wiggins, Kuminga, and then whatever the rest of the salary needs to be. The Warriors have a bunch of guys that they don't need to prioritize to throw in there. I don't think Butler is good enough to justify a couple months rental, and then you probably lose him, or worse, have to pay him 120 million for 2 more years. So, and I just don't get now. If it's Kawhi Leonard, which just not on the table. If it's Kevin Durant, just not on the table. Then you have my attention, because I think those guys are both better than Jimmy. If you're just shooting for like trying to catch lightning in a bottle for the rest of the season, and then both also have longer, more control, like that's the level of move I think it has to be, because I just don't think the Warriors are good enough to where a Jimmy Butler or a Zach LaVine or any of these other names do the thing that you and a lot of people want them to do, which is like just go all in for Steph. Like I don't think that gets them there, because I don't think Steph and Draymond and the rest of those guys are good enough anymore.
I think that's fair. And I also think with the way that Jimmy Butler's been playing, you would have to hope that he's sort of withholding on defense specifically, because when we talked about, because I think we just talked about the Dubs and Jimmy Butler previously, and one of the biggest hangups for me, I'm never going to be in on Kuminga. Like people just, they marry that guy's trajectory after like 2 or 3 games on like any other player in the league.
You're never going to be as in on him as I am, like 3 days out of every week.
Right,
the other 4, I'm ready to just like shoot him into space.
But the idea of having to give up Andrew Wiggins, it's like, and it should, in theory, it shouldn't be, but Jimmy Butler's 35. And if you don't think he is what he was on defense, there's just no way to get him without including Draymond or Andrew Wiggins in there. And so it feels like almost a non-starter. Is there like any, you mentioned, is there any then like, does a Cam Johnson, or if you could just get Brandon Ingram for some type of like if you could get to a Brandon Ingram trade without including Wiggins or Draymond, and you probably could financially speaking, is that the type of rental or just non-nuclear move that you would like?
That's much closer to something I think you could justify. I think then you're still in the position of like, we probably need to be the team that pays Ingram, right? And like it's possible that market might not be as difficult as it seems to come out on top of that market and still be short of the like max level money he wants. Cause unless he goes to Brooklyn or whatever, like I think you could make that work. So yes, I think that gets you a lot closer to something I think would make sense from the organization's perspective, and the people that like ownership seems to be making a lot of, that's what ownership should do, is be in charge. Like that's, you bought the team, you get to do this. It really feels like they are like the fans that anytime Kuminga has a good quarter, it's like, we can't trade this guy. Like he's our future.
Draymond just called him a future superstar.
Draymond can't stop talking about it. It's like, we all see it. We see the flashes. You got to talk about when he misses 5 rotations in a row, or like all this other stuff. Draymond is the best hype man for Kuminga you could possibly ask for.
So what is and we've talked in circles about this on repeated occasions. So you're just more so, this is what they have, and maybe they could catch some sort of lightning in a bottle with it. Or if you could make a trade that doesn't cost you a first-round pick, or maybe a first-round pick beyond this year to slightly upgrade the rotation, that's the better route to go. Or even just waiting for, it's weird that we're not talking about it. And there's like murmurings that the vibes in Phoenix are probably just absolutely terrible. Like, why isn't Kevin Durant on the trade block right now? Like that.
I wrote something preseason of just like, that's the guy that, and it makes all the sense in the world. Cause especially, this is my favorite angle of it, is that Durant was never happy because he didn't like the feeling that people viewed him as like bandwagon hopping or coming into a team that was already set. Like this time he would be saving the team. Like it would be him coming in to like be the hero, and he would be loved for that if things went really well. So that has a lot of like narrative appeal to me, and maybe to him. I don't know. Who knows what he actually cares about.
Can I ask an unscheduled question though about the Phoenix Suns?
Please do.
At what point, if it's, and we mentioned, which I haven't seen or heard mentioned a lot, like if you could turn Ryan Dunn into just a first-round pick from somebody, the idea of getting Bradley Beal to waive his no trade clause for 2 first-round picks. At what point though, do you look at your team and say, we're outside of the play-in right now? Yes, they're close, but we're almost midway through the season and you're outside of the play-in. That's just anecdotally not where you're supposed to be. And it doesn't feel like there's an easy pathway to title contention, even if it's not a decision they actively make. At like, is there a chance that Kevin Durant asks for out, or that there's a Kevin Durant trade midseason? We all said it wouldn't happen midseason the last time he got moved to. No, that's an offseason thing. And then he got moved anyway. Now, he was applying pressure there, but if you're Phoenix and he's talking about, like, I don't really know if I'm going to sign an extension this summer, like you all seem to think I'm going to, and he has the 1 year left on his contract, is that a storyline that's not like almost the Jimmy Butler to Phoenix rumors have kind of masked the fact that should this team be like wondering what's going to happen with Kevin Durant?
I think they should trade him now. I think, and you could have made the case to me. I think I did make the case that there was a lot of logic to it before the season started, because like how many different reasons. One, if Kevin Durant is on the market, he's by far the best. I think he's the most appealing trade candidate out there, right? Like you're going to take him over Butler and over Ingram and over LaVine. Like you're getting more for him than any of those guys. One. And two,
and I think some teams, the market for them would him, even though he's older and the salary is substantial. Could you see a team? I'm not saying they would, but like, couldn't you just see the Spurs be like, yeah, we'll go after Kevin? You can't really say that about Jimmy Butler or Zach LaVine with them.
I think that's right. And I think like if you're Phoenix, you're looking at the landscape and saying like, not only like forget being on the same level as OKC, Dallas, Memphis, whatever. We're like not even at the top of the Lakers, Warriors, like, aging, not contending heap. Like we're somewhere towards the bottom of that group. And like the path to getting higher in that, class is just like, is what I don't see, there's no way. So like Phoenix clearly has, and like, if you have mortgaged your future to the extent the Suns have, it has to be for a contender, and you're not a contender. So like pull the ripcord now and maybe make the back half of this decade not one of the worst we've ever seen a team have. So like you can always rely on, well, if it really goes sideways, we'll trade Devin Booker and we'll get half of somebody's decade's worth of draft picks coming back. But you could get close to that for Durant now. And you can rebuild around Booker if you want to. Like, I don't know. I think the time to move Durant has been like, I don't know that they should have acquired him in the first place, actually, but like given what it cost. So yeah, I think you move him now if you can. You have the best guy on the market. You take charge of the trade deadline if you put him out there.
But where do you go from? Because your first call, I think, and we're about to talk about them, is to Houston and saying, hey, you want to give us those 2 first-round picks back that you own outright of ours, basically, and they're going to say no, I would assume. And then what do you do, though? You trade Kevin Durant, you get another team's draft, you don't have yours. Is the move then to call Houston back and say, how many of our first can we get for Devin Booker?
Yeah, I mean, I do think the way Brooklyn has operated has made, and like I don't know, to use like Atlanta, the position Atlanta's in is tied to this too, of like, if you can't get your own first back, it's real rough to just go through a bunch of losing seasons because you're not getting the ultimate payoff. But sometimes you're just in the spot you're in and you can't do that. And you got to do the second best thing, which is get somebody else's picks or add some flexibility, do all the other stuff that falls short of, option one, which is retake control of your bad seasons by getting your picks back. So, I mean, also, if you called Houston and said, do you want Kevin Durant? I think they would react pretty different. They would, for him, they would reevaluate we don't want to make a trade stance much more thoroughly than they would if it were anybody else. That's like actually on the market.
Ultimately, though, doesn't this feel like it would have to be a Kevin Durant mandate again? Rather, like Phoenix is not going to actively make this decision on its own. And maybe James Jones in a vacuum might. There's no way team owner Matt Ishbia is going to I can't envision the team being the ones to initiate, kind of how Pat Riley flipped the pressure back up. Like, you want out, formally ask for it. And then this is going to be on you. It doesn't matter. They might've nuked his trade value in the process, but whatever. And I'm not saying Phoenix is playing this dare game with Kevin Durant, but and you very rarely see, like, look at Portland and Dame like that. They kind of wait. I don't know. I'm in favor of franchises, especially when it comes to the older guys. Not, you could talk about, are you getting rid of youngsters or giving up on them too early? But when it's Kevin Durant and you know what he is, but where your franchise is headed, it's sort of like teams need to be more proactive in that type of situation. I just don't think Phoenix would move Kevin Durant without Kevin Durant kind of forcing their hand.
And that's stupid because it is coming. Like that is how Kevin Durant's tenures with teams end, is he gets up unhappy and he wants to move. And sometimes he makes multiple formal trade requests before it's so like, you need to, as the Suns, be eyes open here. And like, if this is how good you are for another year, Like, what do you? Of course, that's what's going to happen. Like, he's gonna that's you should assume a Durant trade request is coming, and he wouldn't be wrong because this team isn't going anywhere, and he's at the end of his career. So like, you should proactively address that. I agree with you. I think you have to act as if it's coming and get out ahead of it.
And this does feel like one of those situations where you and I talk a lot about when it gets to the Aaron Fox. That's probably a decision I might wait on until the offseason. You don't do that with Kevin Durant because forget about the time left on the contract. Because I just don't view these. I don't view, unless you're getting Jimmy Butler for pennies on the dollar, I don't think anyone's acquiring Jimmy Butler with the intention of him being a rental. Like we know how this works behind the scenes. You have an idea of whether these guys are going to stay. It's more so just, I mean, Kevin Durant is 30, what is he, 35? This is age 36 season, whatever it is. You're not guaranteed this version of Kevin Durant all the time. So he's playing like this now. And I think teams, either in the heat of the moment or just really trying to capitalize on this window specifically, you might lose some of those squads if you wait until the offseason or you wait for Kevin Durant to force your hand over the offseason.
Yeah. I think any team that's looking at Butler and saying like he might be the piece, right? We'll take on all the risks that come with him, would look at Durant and say he's just better. Like he will, even if the risks are similar, well, he's just the ceiling he gives us is just higher than Butler. I don't know if that's necessarily true. I think it probably is, but I feel like that's how teams are thinking.
Well, if you're looking at it, I mean, their contracts technically run the same length. It's just that Jimmy Butler keeps saying he's going to opt out.
Yeah.
I think Kevin Durant, I think Kevin Durant clearly elevates your ceiling more than Jimmy Butler at this point.
Yeah.
So that's subplot to monitor. Maybe we didn't think necessarily a second trade request was going to come. What did he get traded 2 seasons ago now? And it came, another subplot to monitor. Speaking of, you mentioned this team already, Mr. Hughes.
Yes, we have the Houston Rockets here. According to Mark Stein, the Rockets have no desire to make a midseason consolidation trade. That's because they don't know Kevin Durant's available. No guarantee that they'll be interested in De'Aaron Fox, even in the offseason. Is that real? Is that posturing? Is that just what you say because you're trying to preserve the vibes you have with this team and you don't want to have half the roster thinking we might be, short timers here? That's like a real consideration we don't always talk about. Jalen Green is easier to move over the offseason. He counts as $12.5 million in outgoing salary for the Rockets, but 29.4 in incoming money for other teams. That's basically a poison pill situation. So Dan, because the Rockets have been pretty consistent on this front, do you buy the we're good posture that they're taking? And is there someone that could change that? Is there a player that should change that? Is that player Fox for them? Like, where are you on this?
So there's always a player that could change that. I don't know if De'Aaron Fox is it for me, just because I guess if you're trading Reed Shepherd as part of that deal, then sure. So that might be a name. And Kevin Durant, that's really a fascinating one because part of that Stein report was they're really emphasizing getting someone who's on the timeline with the rest of their players. I buy this insofar as I really do believe that they view Jalen Green's contract value predominantly as this is matching money in that eventual big trade. And that it's easier to, even though a team might say, we don't necessarily want this deal, so that's part of the value that you're getting out of this trade is us taking it on. I think it'll be exponentially harder to move Jalen Green as a standalone contract than as part of this mega blockbuster where you're fine including picks or other prospects because you're getting back De'Aaron Fox or Kevin Durant. I really don't think that they're going to do anything seismic in the middle of the year, though. And I honestly, we talked about this already, so everyone go check out that segment. I think that's the right call for them because I tend to agree, like me saying that's what I believe they're thinking about Jalen Green. That's actually how I feel about Jalen Green. He just needs to be the outgoing money in that trade, and it's easier to do that over the summer or beyond.
I think a couple of things like Fox. That's one where it's like I would think about that if I were Houston. But again, and you probably will be aware of if there's Team X is out there with an offer, they're going to get Fox. Like if it's the Spurs, probably then you might want to come over the top because you can't assume you're going to do better than him going forward in terms of trade options. Which you might, but I mean, Fox is an all NBA guard that's the other thing. Like, they want someone that's in the timeline of their core players. So you need someone on a rookie scale contract. Like you need a 23-year-old that's going to be a superstar that you can.
Hey, Alperen Sengun is about to graduate from that discussion.
Yeah, right. Well, it's like, good luck, fellas. Like those guys don't get traded if they're actually any good. But so Fox being I forget how old Fox is. I want to say like 27. Like that's close enough. I'm good there.
Do you
But
feel if you're Houston, because you did mention Kevin Durant, are you more likely to make the trade for De'Aaron Fox or Kevin Durant if they're assuming they're both available?
I think if
Just
you're
pick
just
De'Aaron Fox so that Kevin Durant is still available for the Warriors. That's how you game it.
you're on to me. I think like Fox is just the Fox would be the one I would probably go for, even though I've already said I think Durant raises your ceiling a little higher. But given what seems like a pretty low risk tolerance Houston is showing in terms of trades, like Fox is safer, I think, younger. You don't have to worry about a lot of the Durant stuff of like, is he going to be happy? How hard is it going to be to keep him happy? I feel like Fox is the safer play. If you're just trying to win this season, I don't know, is Durant just still a better player than Fox? I think that's a reasonable argument if you price in like availability and stuff like that. But I think most people would still say yes, Durant, if he's healthy, is better than Fox and might be the kind of guy that can be the offense unto himself, and that makes this defense hold. I don't know. I would think about it for both of them. Fox is just the safer move, I would say.
Do you think that Fox, so in a vacuum, even if Devin, I guess it really doesn't matter because the salaries are so close, but how much do you think that contracts for a team like Houston, where they're not considered a mega destination anymore, but players like that market, free agency is dead anyway. How worried, if it's Kevin Durant, you're kind of just baking the risk of, you're not worried about him staying here. It's will he still be good in his age 37? So like someone like Fox, who only has a year left on his deal, do you worry about that if you're Houston at all, or do you view that as sort of inconsequential? And how much does it matter that, all right, well, he's about to go from De'Aaron Fox next year, which will be the final year of his deal, makes 37.1. And then all of a sudden his max salary, assuming he doesn't qualify for the Supermax, will be 51 million. And so now that number is jumping up at a time when you're paying some of these other younger guys, and other younger guys need to be paid. And now I'm asking this, but I'm going to give you a second part of that is, who are you acquiring that doesn't, like, you're not acquiring someone on their front. LaMelo Ball, I think, would be the closest one. You're not acquiring someone on the quote unquote, as ESPN's Brian Windhorst calls it, the fun max mostly.
So I think Fox is exactly the type of situation that you talked about before, where it's like, as he's coming on board, like what it will take to keep him, and you're willing to do that. Otherwise, you probably just don't trade for him. I think that's like, that deal is done when the trade gets agreed to, I feel like. So I wouldn't be worried about that. But yeah, like, so the type of upgrade we're talking about for this team, if you're not going to just go, let's leave it alone, organic growth, and see what this roster turns into, anyone that you're going to add sort of has to be at that level, at like a Fox level, where you are paying $50 million for the guy. Because if you don't do that and you just keep the powder dry and you let this team develop, like, you might, I don't know, maybe Amen Thompson learns to shoot and suddenly he's an all-star, and all that. There's all these pathways forward for them. But if you're really going to make that move, it's always going to be someone that you're like not super comfortable with how much they're making. That's just where the Rockets are, I feel like.
Our next team on the docket, the Lakers. Rumors for the Lakers, that's unheard of. Kind of a news dump here, but the Lakers are prioritizing a backup center. According to Michael Scotto of Hoops Hype, Jonas Valanciunas they're willing to flip Gabe Vincent and a second-round pick for him. That's very big of them to include a net negative deal and a second-round pick for Jonas Valanciunas. Cam Johnson, they already acquired Dorian Finney-Smith. They had talks with the Nets about Cam Johnson, though. Is he off the table now that the Lakers have DFS? And then overall, I'm just very curious, like, what do we expect from the Lakers' trade deadline approach? Are they just trying to futz it? Because the reporting of, we want to flip Gabe Vincent and a second-round pick for Jonas Valanciunas just kind of screams, we're futzing and fiddling. But are there any names out there that would force them to rework this strategy? I think everyone agrees that Jimmy Butler is not it. And then, there are names that we could mention saying, okay, Kevin Durant or De'Aaron Fox, you probably are not going to have the best offer in any of those situations. It would take, and I don't know who would have of any player in the league, but for the most part, like maybe Zach LaVine. Okay, sure. But like Kevin Durant, as an example, like you would need Kevin Durant to apply all sorts of leverage to get Kevin Durant. And so just what do you make of how the Lakers will or should approach the trade deadline?
I think, I don't have a lot to add beyond what we've mentioned. As like LaVine makes sense. I view them similarly to the Warriors, where even with the urgency to win now, while your old players are still very good, if not the best they've ever been, that's real. but I don't think the guy is out there that they could realistically acquire that gets you into the top tier of title contenders. So it's like, as unsatisfying as it is, you don't just mortgage your future for whoever happens to be the best available player, because in this instance, like, that guy's just not good enough to get you where you want to be. So I don't know. At least I'm being consistent with how I'm dealing with the Lakers and Warriors, even though a lot of my Warriors analysis is based on like, what kind of team do I want to watch for the next 5 years? How bad do I want it to look if they do this and it goes wrong? But that's where I'm at. Like, the name needs to be pretty big, and LaVine is kind of the cutoff for me. And I still think, honestly, like, pick wise, I don't feel great if I'm the Lakers giving up all the firsts I can for Zach LaVine, even if we've both kind of agree, like, yeah, that guy makes sense there.
I would consider a first round pick, and even that's tough because it has to be so far out.
Yeah.
In their case,
how bad should they feel if they end up giving for 2 firsts or even 1 when they could have just had him for matching salary? It seems like, less than a year ago, you'd feel.
If they actually could have done that, they should feel terrible about themselves. Yeah. I mean, they should already feel pretty terrible about the way that they've built this team around LeBron and AD since the championship. But I think I'm with you. I see more urgency on the Warriors' behalf because I think that they're still more complete than the Lakers. And even though like the standings on any given day is going to reflect otherwise, but I am with you in the sense that I'm fine to see. I mean, like, even if they went and got Vooch, whereas can you figure out a way? You have 2 seconds you could trade, I believe. I think the Bulls would trade Vooch for that, but like, is your matching salary? It'd have to be Vanderbilt and Gabe Vincent. Like, is that getting it done? So if you can get rid of one of them in a second to get Jonas Valanciunas, and Washington looks at it from the perspective of, well, Gabe Vincent's contract is shorter than Jonas Valanciunas is, but then you effectively, what you did is you signed Jonas Valanciunas and are paying Gabe Vincent for a year so that you could get a second round pick from the Lakers. Like, just a weird order of events. I would do that deal if I'm the Lakers, but you're right. I don't know like with Kevin Durant, if he's like, I'm only going to go to the Lakers. If you're the Lakers, do you pounce on that? Or is that even I would be more confident that Kevin Durant elevates the Golden State Warriors to title contention than I would be the Lakers at this point.
Yeah.
They did trade for Dorian Finney-Smith, and Austin Reeves has been balling. So maybe that's an outdated take, but I still think, I don't know, because you're probably giving up Wiggins for that's a tough one. Which team is better off with Kevin Durant, the Lakers or the Warriors?
Oh, I've been on let's give him to the Warriors. How insane would that be? Would that be the story of the season? Like, that would be unbelievable. Yeah, I think, like, how do the Lakers even get to Durant's money? Like, are they just they're giving up half
you
the
have Rui, Vanderbilt, Gabe. And the other thing too about the Warriors, their matching salary is far more palatable than anyone the Lakers are sending out. They sent out their most palatable matching salary, and that was D'Angelo Russell as an expiring.
Yep, that's true. Yeah, they burned that one on DFS, and that kind of might indicate that's about as good as they're going to do realistically in the trade market this year.
By the way, the other thing too is there probably should be more of a priority to preserve their long-term asset stash, because they don't have, as iffy as I am on Jonathan Kuminga, at least the Warriors can kind of point to, okay, Kuminga and Pods, and we have more of our first-round picks. The Lakers are in a situation where they have fewer of their outright first-round picks available, and you don't point to, Austin Reeves isn't young, number one, and then relative to NBA standards. And then 2, like, Dalton Connect is not this bridge into the future.
No, yeah. He's a nice supplementary piece, maybe a starter. Like, that's about it. On to my Memphis Grizzlies. John Morant, that right shoulder, which was operated on, he suffered a grade 1 AC joint sprain in that shoulder. He's considered week to week. I don't love that. I'd like a firmer timeline. Day to day is one thing. Week to week that's rough. Fortunately, Memphis is a plus 7.9, has a plus 7.9 net rating without Morant this year. That's 2,100 possessions, which is also another problem that he's been off the floor for that much of the year. Their offense is in the 77th percentile, defense in the 81st. So, like, the depth of this team and the style they play just kind of is insulating them against, they've had several players miss time. Unfortunately, some of that depth is also out. Santi Aldama's got an ankle. G.G. Jackson still hasn't played. Marcus Smart got a finger injury. Vince Williams Jr., same as Jackson, missed a ton of time. He's got an ankle. Brandon Clark's day-to-day with the Cavs. Zach Edey is in the concussion protocol. Jake LaRavia's got an ankle. So some of this depth is going to be tested.
Who's not injured? That's the question.
Could you have just made the list of guys that are totally healthy, no problems? It's like Jaren Jackson. I assume he's probably got like a hangnail or something.
And Desmond Bane's been banged up at points.
Yeah, right. It hasn't mattered. Memphis is still looking like a top 4 team in the West, and they've had crazy injury issues, not to last year's extent, but basically nobody has ever had them to that extent. they're not a team we've talked a ton about, just to keep it in context of like trade deadline stuff very much. Other than like it could have done something for DFS, it sounds like, but when I didn't love the price. Do these injuries specifically to Morant make you think they're more inclined to make a deal? Are they good enough? I mean, we could just sort of have any kind of Memphis conversation you want to have here.
Are they going to win 60 games despite all the injuries? Well, that's the other conversation here now.
Well, that's part of it. It's like, do you need to do anything or just kind of wait it out?
I will say, I don't think this does it. The Ja Morant, like that's the big one is, yes, I know what the numbers say, but like if you miss Ja Morant for an extended period of time in the West, like that's not ideal.
You know what, Dan? It's not ideal if your best player's hurt. That's
I
heard a smart guy say one time.
So I don't think this increases the urgency though, just because the way they act. I don't think this and the depth they have in place and how well they played this season. I think they have the luxury of not being urgent, and they also need to approach this, I think, now with, and they probably already were, with a healthy amount of skepticism of, does it matter? Because is Ja Morant going to be healthy when we need him? It's not on the same level of the Zion Williamson discussion. I want to make that clear, but that has to be in the back of your mind. So I don't think this team would have been a candidate to make anything mega. That being said, the fact that it doesn't accelerate their urgency doesn't mean they shouldn't do and like sit out the trade deadline, because I really do believe that they're good enough to say, and like you want to consolidate your rotation a little bit. And just based off, like when you look at we've been talking about wings for Memphis from the end of time. I know Jalen Wells, he's going to be heavily involved in the Rookie of the Year discussion. I think we both had him in our top 3 when we did our quarter season awards. But like now Vince Williams, who was undersized to begin with, has missed a ton of time. Marcus Smart, undersized to begin with as a wing, he's missed a ton of time. And Gigi Jackson's yet to play, as you mentioned, this season. Like you got to at least do something. Join our Discord because you get to hear me tell you how wrong you are all the time. But no, I don't do that much. I don't think a lot of our Discord members said they should have just pulled off the DFS trade with what was rumored. I think you could make a strong case for that, but I'm also kind of like, they were going to give up 2, in theory, of their most important shooters on this team too. And like spacing the floor. I know the way their offense is run is unique and it's working, but I want to see them get, like, I think if you're looking at the wing spot and you ideally want a 2-way wing, but I'm prioritizing like a more dynamic offensive player at this point. If I'm Memphis, then we want a 3-and-D guy or someone who's going to skew all the way towards defense. And that's kind of where like a Cam Johnson for them would almost be perfect. Like they're never mentioned as the team, not never. I feel like everyone's talking about OKC or the Kings, maybe because they've been, the Kings specifically, most aggressive. Memphis just might be the smartest Cam Johnson team.
Yeah, and more generally, they're an obvious consolidation trade team, because I think like we do think they're going to finish with a really high seed. You can't play 11 guys in the playoffs. Like that isn't what's going to happen. So that's not to say like, oh, these guys that are playing well right now, like they won't be this good in the postseason. It's just like realistically, no team ever keeps the same incredibly deep rotation in a playoff series. You just try to hope you got the best 8 or 9, maybe 8, sometimes 7 if you get really deep into it. And
you're the Knicks, the best 3, 4. Yeah. How many guys does Tibbs play?
Yeah, 3, 2.5. Like it just, you don't get the same value out of those guys. So obviously, like, yeah, Cam Johnson is going to give you more than, Brandon Clark, Luke Kennard, John Conchar, or whatever. Like that's not that's remotely on the table, but like that's just the way they should think about it. The other thing is like, this probably isn't the time to mention it, but like, I think if this Grizzlies team built around Ja Morant, who I think is going to have a very short prime because of like the things he's great at don't last. You might want to incorporate a little more all-in thinking than they have so far. I'm not saying just go nuts, but like Ja Morant is only going to be this athletic for so long, and he's the injuries are piling up. Like you can't. I don't think you're like, let's bide our time till his age 29 season when he really peaks. Like he may still be great then. A lot of things he does well don't have to do with athleticism, but most of the things that make him elite are physical abilities that just don't last. So I don't know, just like something to like chew on. If you're Memphis, is urgency, you could justify high urgency and maybe a little short-term recklessness.
I don't think this will make people feel good about his career arc, but I mean, he is playing well now relative to what we've seen in years past. But like Russell Westbrook's athleticism has endured quite a bit, wouldn't you say? Pretty well.
And I think you would say it's, to devil's advocate, like he is the caliber of athlete that Morant was the caliber of athlete that Morant is, which is to say like maybe the best athlete in the league, just like run and jump ability. he's the exception though. Like it just, and if you want to bring in the injury stuff, Derrick Rose was not the same after a lot of injuries. That's the other guy you'd point to athletically.
The other thing is John Morant, and I'm not insulting anyone here. I want to make this clear. I'm not body shaming. John Morant looks like a normal human being.
Right. He's thin.
Russell Westbrook was violently chiseled at the peak of Russell Westbrook and still kind of is. I don't know why I can't say his name today. Russell Westbrook. So I do support your point that it was even the same thing with Zion and the Pelicans, that they had no margin for error and they acted like they did.
Yeah.
So I still don't say, I think Memphis is good enough where they don't need it. And it should be easier for Memphis. No, you don't need a mega trade. You're not looking for a second best player at this point. You have two candidates as the second best player on a championship team, either Desmond Bane or, as of right now, Jaren Jackson Jr. could probably argue is the best player on this team. But when you factor in availability for this season, I hope they make a move just because I really do think this team is special. Like the depth they have and their ability to navigate injuries is special, but it matters a little less when you get to the playoffs.
Yep.
What do we have now? I gave you some of the depressing ones. You had Jaden Ivey and the John Morant stuff. I have a little complicated one. So Anthony Edwards, the Timberwolves lost to the Cavs and the Celtics back-to-back. Oh, excuse me, Thunder and the Celtics back-to-back. I would go recommend looking at it. Dane Moore had the full kind of interview of the Dane Moore NBA show. But Anthony Edwards said after the loss on being forced to get off the ball because of the way teams are guarding him, he said, quote, "It's not how I want to play, of course. I'm only 23. I don't just want to be passing the ball all night, but the way they're guarding me, I think I have to." There are a lot of things that you could say about Anthony Edwards, about his flaws and the decisions he's made. I love quotes like this. I saw some people killing him. You can't want athletes to be candid. And when they say something legitimate, like this is not toxic, this is not ridiculous. And you can't then pan them for saying so. What do you make of this whole situation? I'm sorry, two questions for you. What do you make of this? But first, have we been on who's been a more violent roller coaster this year, the Timberwolves or the field? What's the team we've had to go back and forth on the most?
I mean, for me, it's probably the field, just because I don't know what it is about the Wolves. I always want to just include them in the who we got to keep talking about as contenders conversation.
You did. I talked about leaving out Denver, Phoenix, and Minnesota in the discussions we had about contenders, and you were the strongest advocate of Minnesota. Look at you.
And there's a lot of reasons to say that's a stupid opinion to have. I mean, because you said nothing's clicked. This hasn't, the defense was awful and that got a little sorted out over recent weeks, but there's a lot of reasons to doubt them. I want to ask you though, because I've only read this. Did you saw the video of him offering this quote? Is that right?
Yeah.
So is this another case where the difference between what you get out of it, viewing him speaking versus reading it is pretty significant, like in terms of tone or what you should take away from it?
The tone was very conversational, and he was, I want to say it was John Krasinski of The Athletic who's going back and forth with him, and Dane might have asked one of the questions too. No one forced him to go there, but there was a back and forth where it was this wasn't, he went on this long diatribe unprompted.
Yeah. Okay. But it's a lot like the previous instance where I can't even remember, but where he was saying we're talking about we're not friends out there. What was it? We're babies,
also say,
that kind of thing.
Yeah. He also one time said he was shocked to see Julius Randle play defense.
Yeah.
And if you watched the exchange and Julius Randle's standing right there, you get he was being honest, but
he's zinging him though, right? Which you can only do if your relationship's pretty good, probably. Okay. So my thought is show me the lie. That's what he's saying is correct. You watch any Wolves game, and for me, I marvel at how well how good he's become at making difficult threes and how many threes he's shooting. And as I'm marveling at it, I'm like, this is wrong. This sucks. This is a symptom of an offense that is not playing the way that you would want it to with a player like him. That's been a point everybody has made that's watched the Wolves, is how are we not getting downhill all the time? But Rudy Gobert is in the middle of the floor, and that's the only place he can be. And that is just what you got. And I think it's not just Rudy, but that's a huge part of it. And if you don't have an elite spacing forward, which is what he was last year, like Cat, and even then the offense wasn't very good. This is just what you're going to get. So, I mean, I don't know what the fix is, but it's pretty clear to me what the problem is. It's a lack of other dangerous creators that draw more than one defender. And it's poor spacing because you have a non-stretch, the ultimate non-stretch center in the middle of it all. That's all it is, right? They're just, I honestly credit to him for like playing a way that is kind of right for this team, even if it's clearly not the best way to use him in a vacuum. Like, I think Edwards deserves credit for, like, I don't think he wants to play this way, like, pretty clearly. Like, he said it now, finally. But like, what else is, it would be worse if he were trying to just like run into brick walls or, forcing it. I think he'd be getting a bunch of criticism for that if that's how he were playing.
Yeah, and look, his drives are, to throw some numbers behind what Grant is saying, his drives per 36 minutes last year, over 15. This year, about 12 and a half. He's passing on 35% of his drives, which is 30% last year, which isn't, that 5% difference doesn't seem huge, but like it's a sixth of an increase over what he was doing.
Mm-hmm.
And when the drives just aren't as high quality either. So last year, you're looking at his shooting on drives it's actually lower than I thought. Well, no, this year it's 47%. Last year, he was at 54% shooting. So you're talking about fewer drives, more passing off those drives, and the lanes just aren't as open. And so like the quality of your drives is just down. I totally get his frustration. We've talked a lot about, again, I would go back to that championship contender episode we did about how they could maybe continue to rework the rotation. I'm starting to think though, like, is it just, you have to play him with Naz Reid at all times if you want him, and then that what's best for your team? Or is this more of a, have we reached the point where, yeah, there will be nights where the Timberwolves look like caps lock championship contenders, but the makeup of this roster is just not going to allow a balance between, okay, Ant has to cater to like the strengths of everybody else, but we can also find ways to do a better job of pandering. Well, that's a negative connotation, but like finding ways to unlock Anthony Edwards' best self.
Well, it's sort of like, I don't know the answer to that. I think my knee jerk that I'm less confident in now than before is just like, well, Randall's got to be out of the starting lineup. You go McDaniels, DiVincenzo, Ant, Gobert, and Conley. There's more playmaking there. There's more shooting. There's more space. Like, that's how you fix it. I don't know. I'm not sure that's the magic bullet. Still seems like logically that makes sense. Like that type of lineup anyway. It could be Reid or DiVincenzo, whichever you want. Just like get the spacing out there, I guess, would be one way to solve it.
Do I say it? Let's revisit the Julius Randle plus second round picks for John Collins conversation.
Yeah, sure. I mean, Collins is going to shoot it better, if not more than Randle. The thing, it's interesting though, like if you just compare, say, like, how about this? Is it fair to say that like SGA in Oklahoma City has, other than having a pretty good secondary creator, similar like challenges in years past where it's like, yeah, the spacing's not great and he just has to like get into the lane, lead the league in drives, and then like that triggers the offense, like that you get the drive kick thing that the Thunder have excelled at. This year's different, but like it seemed like SGA, just to compare him to Edwards, like, is it just that Edwards is not as effective? Now, nobody's as effective as SGA as a driver or as like an isolation guy. He's just the best there is. But like, how much of it's just on him not being able to generate, like we're talking about like, how do they cater to him? Like, how do they make it so he's in a better position to succeed? If he's the guy that he started to be billed as last postseason as like next, shouldn't it be him that's like finding a way to like make this work? And maybe that's what he's trying by shooting a ton of threes. Like circumstantially, that's just what maybe the Wolves need, but maybe some of it's on him. Like figure out a way to get downhill and like make guys better if you're that guy.
I guess there could be some of it's on him, but it's just so tough because Anthony Edwards is on a team right now where they could send 3 to the ball and it might not matter. OKC, you can't send 2 to Shea without worrying about. So, and there's like, it's not even about the quality of the supporting cast, but the archetypes behind it, because OKC doesn't really look at its big. Like even Isaiah Hartenstein's not a floor clogger because he can make decisions from the middle of the floor at minimum. So you don't have that Rudy Gobert element there. And then you also like, let's look at Lou Dort versus Jaden McDaniels. Like there are defenses that the Lou Dort, there's value in the volume. So forget about the percentages he shoots, which he's been fine during the regular season. But like Jaden McDaniels is just, teams don't care about him. And they're also your second option, which I think is a bigger deal with Cat. When he would go downhill, you're more likely to send 2 to the ball. Teams this season seemed like, of the Timberwolves games that I have watched, so 0, I feel like they send 1 to the ball on Julius Randle. And it's just, if Julius Randle is going to beat us, then so be it. But they also don't care about his off-ball gravity. And I would argue when it comes to J-Dub, we've talked about, okay, it hasn't really translated to the non-Shea minutes, but like teams care when he's open or when he gets going downhill way more than they care if Julius Randle is open or going downhill. That's, and I think, anecdotally.
Yeah, no, you're right. I was getting a little devil's advocate again, but like that's the thing. Like when Ant gets extra bodies, so if the ball comes out to Gobert, which is like who you probably want to double off, like he's not doing anything with it. And if it goes to McDaniels, like he's not doing anything with it. And if it's Conley, he's going to just look for the next pass, which is going to be to someone who's not going to do anything with it. So like I think the Randall piece is really the one to focus on because he's supposed to be the guy that if you guard him straight up or even he has advantages because you sent multiple bodies at Ant, like Randall's supposed to be the guy that's going to make you pay as a defense. And I think you're exactly right. Defenses are like, cool. Like, okay, you want to get 37, have at it. Your team will score 94 points and you can't win like that. I do feel like he gets treated that way. And that's maybe the best argument for just like him and Ant. Like he's not making Ant better. Like that's pretty clear, I think, so, and I think Randall is one of those rare players that just is sort of going to get you the production he's going to get you regardless of supporting cast, regardless of how he's defended. And the question is like, is that actually valuable to winning? And so far with Minnesota, like, no, I guess it hasn't been. So maybe it's him.
Is there anything too, just to play off your point, the cadence at which they would work on the ball? Like Anthony Edwards has definitely developed like more change of pace and is more methodical on the ball, but is someone like Shea his archetype? Or like, look at the pace that Luka will operate, or it's just like, I don't know what the word is. It's maniacally deliberate, whereas Ant is maniacally abrupt. And there's just two different types of players. Do you think someone like that is just better suited to handle heliocentric attention than the way that Anthony Edwards plays? And that, to be fair, that's not necessarily a knock against Anthony Edwards. I'm just trying to, like, if you put Shea Gilgeous-Alexander on the Timberwolves, do you believe that they are better off, particularly on the offensive end?
I do, but that's just because I think SGA is, other than Jokic, the best offensive player in basketball probably at this point. So like, I think he's just better, but I think that's a great point. Like Edwards is someone who already sort of has a superpower that you could further juice by like getting him the ball in advantage situations. Like if you imagine him in like the Donovan Mitchell role on the Utah teams where nobody ever caught the ball at a dead stop. It was always while you were already running and you're coming around a screen with like a slight, window of daylight. Like he would be unguardable if he always got the ball in positions where he had a slight advantage already. So stylistically, that's for sure a factor. Like if you use the OKC comparison again, even in previous years, SGA was with like good cutters and guys that like Jay Will, who would space out to shoot threes as opposed to, the environment was just better in addition to SGA being just a better player offensively, at least. So yeah, it's a combination of factors. It's frustrating. Like you do get the sense, don't you, that like Ant's not being the best version of himself that he could be. And it's not totally his fault. I feel like feels like we're losing something.
And the final point here, I actually didn't expect to spend this much time on it. They really, maybe it pans out long-term. And I know he's dealing with an ankle injury at the moment. There was a miscalculation with the Rob Dillingham acquisition. And the miscalculation was either, I don't think they expected him to just be ready right away because they went out and made the Cat trade. And maybe that was financially driven. But if they expected him to be ready right away, they never really gave him that opportunity. And so it feels like more of a miscalculation on the part of, we thought this roster had another year of a buffer between, and I guess, what does that fall on? Between Conley and Randall, you thought you were going to have enough offensive contingencies to buy a year of development for Rob Dillingham, and then he would kind of take over the mantle leading into next year. Because I know fans, and we contemplated, like, that's not necessarily a move you make unless you think he's ready. But like you and I know we're on the same page with this. We're always going to approach rookies contributing to contenders, unless they're on Memphis, to be clear, with just a mass amount of skepticism. And so it feels like they just miscalculated, I guess, like how much like this roster was going to float. But then it's also, they made that deal and then traded Karl Anthony Towns. And so maybe you would have had that buffer had you not made the trade. That's going to be a fascinating transaction to look back on. But immediately, by the way, it hamstrings what they can do if they wanted to fix anything. Like because you can't aggregate salaries. It's not like, oh, Julius Randle and Rob Dillingham, what can we get for that? And you also just don't have that swap and that pick now available for a trade if you thought something was going to come along with a 1-for-1 or a 1-for-2 type swap.
Yeah, you'd be in a lot better position if you're trying to turn Randall into someone that you might keep for longer term or fits better if you had the draft assets you lost in the Dillingham move, I think.
Because even look, you could trade Randall, that Pistons pick, and then if you had your pick, like the swap or the pick, that might have gotten you Cam Johnson.
Yeah, right. I think it just, I don't know. Charitably, Dillingham maybe is there for when Conley ages out, which we're like pretty close to at this point. And it wasn't ever like he's going to be our sixth man on a team that is going to make the final. Like that felt like the logic. If it was, I think that wasn't it.
These are for you. We've back-to-back Pelicans notes.
All right. Mike Scotto confirms that Brandon Ingram shut down previous talks that would have landed John Collins in New Orleans because he did not want to end up in Utah. Is that a mistake by Brandon Ingram? What's the appeal for Utah? Like, why do you want this isn't Ingram to Utah has been something we've sort of like seen kicked around just because where else, it was a lot of it. Why would Utah be interested in him?
Was it just to get off Collins' money for next year?
In order to take on, if it's as a rental, it's always been, because then you're talking, okay, we want to keep him. If it's what you're saying, and we'd love to be out from under Collins, and that next year of the deal. So we'll rent Brandon Ingram and let him go into free agency. That's weird. And if it's we believe Brandon Ingram and Lauri Markkanen are the ideal front court combo, like that's maybe weirder.
Weird.
The Utah appeal is I don't know, man. Like I get the New Orleans side of it, obviously. Like give us Walker Kessler maybe, and we're happy. Or that was before Yves Missi became a superstar. But yeah, I buy Brandon Ingram not wanting to go to Utah, and I don't understand why Utah would have ever been all that interested.
Do you think it would have been more justifiable by them over the offseason before John Collins went on to have the season that he's having?
Probably, but I still don't understand the financial side.
And I ultimately think it was smart by Brandon Ingram if he's the one who poo-pooed that deal, because okay, let's say you play well in Utah. There's still a team like the Pelicans are less likely to let him walk for nothing. They might view themselves as trapped because of the Zion Williamson situation. Mm-hmm. They might still pay you, or they'll send you to another team, maybe that panics at the deadline or needs an infusion that's more likely to keep you because of Utah's situation. He could have a Lauri Markkanen type season, and they might still, like when Lauri first went to Utah, and they could still they're at a point where we'll just let you go anyway. And so, or go find, they might be, or at the very least, I would say they'd probably be more inclined to really try and squeeze him on the open market. And he has to look at the cap space landscape and say, any team I'm on needs to want or have an outside chance of wanting to pay me moving forward.
Well, and the other downside is if you don't want to be in Utah, there is a good chance that Utah's like, we're going to beat the market, because it might be like two teams and you're here now for 4 years in a place you don't want to be. And we're all just waiting for the trade request, like that's no good. We don't want that either.
And this is the question I have about him, which is why I included him, because so much time is spent on LaVine now and Butler and Durant, apparently by us. Is there a Brandon Ingram team?
He's just a hard player to have in a major role because of all the things he doesn't do. Like it's everything that was like problematic about him in New Orleans will follow him. Like, I think we know roughly what sort of player he is. Just to compare him to LaVine gives you the off ball value, like over a career. Like Ingram has, shot it more from three, but like, I think if you're comparing the two, you're just going to trust LaVine in a smaller to add value as a smaller role. Now, like even if he's paid, not like a small role player, but Ingram is just, if he doesn't have the ball and isn't getting the shots he likes, which are tough twos, like what is he doing for you at the price point you're going to have to pay? So I don't know what that team is. Like, I don't know. I don't see the team that's like, we need a moderate efficiency 2-point jump shooter that doesn't help us very much off the ball on offense or defense. Like who's asking for that? I don't know.
And then there's also, even if there's a team that's just willing to send back contracts, is New Orleans at the point where that's what they're going to send out Brandon Ingram for? Are they still trying to get real stuff for him?
Yeah, I don't know.
This one's not going to be any less confusing, I guess, as we move on to the latest Zion Williamson reporting. ESPN's Bobby Marks, and I think it was it Tim McMahon, had a fascinating piece the other day about just kind of Zion's value around the league. One rival exec said that like figuring out his trade value is the hardest thing to do right now. Zion is not planning to request a trade, though, despite changing representation this season. I don't even know if he has the leverage to request a trade to be. I honestly don't know.
Yeah.
However, Mark Stein of the Stein Line previously reported Zion technically is available. The only Pelicans considered not available are Herb, Trey Murphy, and Yves Missi, apparently. An executive from the East told ESPN, though, I would probably do something stupid to get him if I were making decisions. I just want to make it clear I'm not that executive from the Eastern Conference. That is something I've already said, but I'm not an executive for an Eastern Conference team. They've kind of floated. ESPN mentioned like Golden State as a possible landing spot. Zion's contract is fascinating too. They also introduced the idea that would the Pelicans just move him as a contract? His contract's not really detrimental. If you're watching on YouTube, you could see the way the guarantees trigger on screen, but he has 3 years and $127 million left. All of them are non-guaranteed, and he has to reach certain weigh-in benchmarks and games played benchmarks for it to progressively become more guaranteed. And so if New Orleans really pushed for it or wanted it, if they want off the money, they can probably just get there, but I don't think you lose a transcendent talent, potential transcendent talent, however injury prone they are, for nothing. What do you make of all this? We've talked about it a bunch, but I found this analysis of it interesting. So Zion not requesting a trade is good. Maybe that means that he's happy in New Orleans, but if you're the Pelicans, like how do you just approach this? Is it just we need to wait and hope that lightning strikes in a bottle with him for a season, or are you ready to move on?
I think all the challenges that we've discussed related to Zion are still there, which is to say he's hard to build around. The conditioning and health are unreliable. And so like, what are you really doing if he is the central figure of your organization? Like, that's a challenge that they're going to have for as long as he's there. But I think like it's the nature of this contract sort of makes it so that anytime you're trading Zion, like, or there's no urgency because you don't really ever get to a point where you're selling low because of the like stacked non-guaranteed seasons. So it's like he's always going to have appeal in some way to a team that wants money that it can erase, or you know what I mean? Like, or that's more willing to take on the year to year like uncertainties than the Pelicans are, who've endured them for half a decade. Like, so I think you can, as New Orleans, if you're comfortable with just carrying over all of the complications that come with building around him, which I just mentioned and we talk about all the time, you can just wait and hope you do get a healthy stretch from him. And either that means like, oh my God, we are good enough with him, or it means like now we can trade him for like real value. Because, you know, so it's weird in that like, as long as he's there, it's always going to be difficult for New Orleans to like really build a functional team that you can like sort of believe in. But like, they also have like, there's a real justification for not like freaking out and moving him, because you can be the team that makes the money disappear if you want to. Like it's very unusual. It's unique. There aren't contracts like this. Like this is a special case.
I also so if you're moving, like, so the Nets would be a fascinating team for me because he's not going to ruin your tank this year. And he's always injured that you could just slow play it next year. But if you're the Pelicans, unless they're like the Brooklyn Nets aren't a team that's going to give you a couple of first round picks for Zion Williamson. And so if you're the Pelicans, you could say, well, just getting out of that money has value. So let's say there's like some sort of what are you doing with that money? Because if you're getting rid of Zion, you've decided, well, we're starting over. Right. So you don't need that salary slot. Yeah, if you want to, you're not getting anyone in free agency like that. That first of all, not only are you in New Orleans, that's not historically been a destination. Free agency has not worked like that in what feels like years. I mean, I know Paul George just left. Jalen Brunson went from Dallas to New York, but how often is that stuff actually happening right now?
You're running up against an issue I want to talk about so bad, but we'll save it for Jimmy Butler at the end.
But I just don't think. Is there any? I think if they were going to move him, I'm not moving him for less than 2 first-round picks at this point, because I'd rather wait and see, can I get him healthy and reboot his value, or does this just work out? I don't understand what are you going to do? Find a way to move him with CJ McCollum for expiring money? Like you're viewing that as part of the value. Again, what does that do for you?
What do you think about San Antonio?
I mentioned that on a previous podcast I did the other day. I would love that. And it's just not something the Spurs would ever do, though.
Yeah, probably not. But man,
they could give 2 first-round picks for Zion Williamson with money, but they're just not going to do that. I would love it though. And that's the value of Wemby, by the way, is everyone complains about he needs more paint touches or let's see him operate down low. Is there a big that he can't play alongside?
No, there's nobody he can't play with. That's the thing. Like of all his incredible qualities, like there's nobody you put on the Spurs that you say, I don't like that fit. It's not possible. You can't find me you put Rudy Gobert on the Spurs, I'd be like, looks good to me. Like I see no problems.
We are getting closer to Jimmy Butler, Grant. Just 2 more teams.
I hope I remember my take. Some more updates on the ongoing De'Aaron Fox situation. Sam Amick of The Athletic reports Fox is not on the trade market. Bleach Report's Eric Pincus says executives still expect Fox to request out before the February 6th trade deadline. So some conflicting stuff, I guess, or maybe not conflicting if it's the contention is he's not on it now, trade market wise, but he may be.
I will say we know Amick because I think he used to be on the Kings beat, right? But he's always been
he's local too. So like he's very much on. That's the guy you pay attention to for King stuff for sure among national writers, among probably anybody, honestly. Amick also notes the Magic are supposed to be heavily involved or interested in Fox. Mark Stein says the Spurs will be seriously interested over the offseason. We have heard the Houston rumblings in conjunction with Houston not being interested in making a trade. So just looking at Fox here, but let's go like sort of sequentially. Do you believe that the Kings are not considering trading him right now, that he's not on the market?
I do, and my stance will remain that I think it would be dumb to do so unless he asks for out. Like, this isn't a Kevin Durant situation where I think the Suns should make the call. You're dealing with an all-NBA type player in his prime who has not communicated yet to you. Like, his next contract's going to be expensive. He will still be the same type of player on that next contract. So unless he asks for out, I wouldn't be looking at moving him.
Yeah, we've talked about it a little bit now that you made me remember. It's like, try everything else before you go to trading Fox. Right. And actually, we said that before Mike Brown got fired, right? It was like, here's all the other things you should do before you trade Fox, and they did one. So
that was prescient. That conversation ended up aging so well, even though it posted like 10 minutes before he got fired.
Yeah, we missed a massive development, but we sort of, I don't know, pointed to it.
We forecasted it.
Yeah, forecasted. I do have some more Kings notes. You want me to get through those, even if they're not on the screen? I think they're kind of.
Well, the other thing, do you expect Fox to, before we move to the next slide, which might be more about the Kings going the opposite direction, like, do you think Fox, what would be the value in Fox requesting out now? Is it just if you waited, let's say he asked like January 15th when all these other guys become eligible to be traded, it's just, well, now you might have more say over where you go because the Kings have less time to figure it out? Because doesn't it also increase the risk that, well, then you have to stay on a team like Anthony Davis did that you requested a trade from for a half season and shit's just awkward?
I think that's part of it. I think the flip side of that, which is the sooner you get to this new team, the more information you're able to get about it from Fox's perspective to see if this is where I want to, sign my next contract. That's part of it too, maybe. Now that's more of a difference between like now versus the off season, because now versus the actual trade deadline is a month and whatever. I don't know. I could see, now this hasn't been reported or anything, but it's like what we have seen come out just suggests to me that Fox is like seeing the Kings situation with clear eyes. And it's like, we're not a contender. I don't know how we get there. I want in my prime of my career to be on a contender, and I'm not the reason we're not a contender. Like so I think he's just surveying the landscape and I think correctly concluding like, this isn't where it's going to happen for me in terms of like maybe winning a title or making a conference final. So like, I get it. It's just now it's a timing question, basically.
I would still be threefold point very quickly if he requested a trade now. I think one, you might as well play out the season, see if you make all NBA and can get a 5-year, $340+ million deal. Then you're locked into there for another year, but that's a lot of money. Two, the teams that are being mentioned, and I'd be curious to know what your favorite fit for him is. The Magic, the Spurs, and the Rockets, just sort of the primary teams that would be willing to go after him. Those are all teams that I don't think internally are motivated to make a midseason deal. I think they would all, because Orlando, all the injuries. And then with the Spurs, that's really not how they operate. Although you could make the case that Wemby's so good now, do you treat him with urgency? And then Houston, I don't think Houston should make him. If I'm the Magic or Spurs, yeah, I'm giving up what I need to give up to get Fox. So I think that would factor into it. And then the other thing is here too, that the Kings are going to be fine because Keon Ellis is starting now. So you see
they finally sorted that out. Yeah. You saved the best point for last. I think I like his fit on all three of those teams. And I just think like, I guess if you're willing to wait for him to actually hit free agency and sign him then, which is a year and a half away, right? Yeah. I that's so far down the road that maybe the Spurs could justify that. But for all three of those teams, it's like, if you want De'Aaron Fox, go get De'Aaron Fox. Like, just do that and have him on the team now. And then if you still think, oh, we're not quite ready, it's really about 25, 26 or 26, 27, fine. But like, just go get him if you can get him. I just don't want to wait a year and a half to sign the guy.
If you're Fox, though, are you short circuiting your one chance at the Supermax by requesting a trade now? And then two, wouldn't you rather, let's throw the Supermax out of the equation. He will have more control, I would think, over where he goes if this season's over and he just has the year left on his deal, as opposed to teams believing, hey, he has a year and a half before free agency. Like, we can sell him on this place.
Why would he have more control?
Because he has just 1 year left before free agency. So if he tells you I'm not going to extend, I think teams will take that as a more salient point, like over the summer, than they will now, where it's, well, we got a season and a half to show you that, no, you actually are going to stay here.
Well, what I would worry about is getting to the point where you are just going to hit free agency and then nobody has any money, and your options, or, that's hard to imagine, but it's not off the table, because we're sort of in that. Or if you're in a situation like it'll be this summer, where any free agent is like, do I want to play for Brooklyn? Like, I don't know that. Now, San Antonio, I think, is maybe the exception, because they could have the money potentially to sign him an off season and a year and a half from now. I'll just keep using that term. Whereas like Houston may not, and Orlando may not. So like, but then I think the problem really, as I'm thinking about it, is that like, if you are the Spurs and you just want to get him now, like, he's going to be he's going to cost 3 firsts, like, and stuff probably. So like, that could be prohibitive if you do think you can sign him. I don't know. I just want to do it now. And if I'm Fox, I really want to do it now, because I'm just like, I'm done.
That's interesting. So of the three, you think the Spurs are the team that are like, if he's available now, like, just go get him?
I think so, because if you're the Spurs, then any team that gets him now potentially has a favorable situation, because if he does get to free agency, you're like, nobody can pay you what we're going to pay you, or like 2 teams can pay you what we can pay you, and they suck. Like, you don't want to go play. You left Sacramento because you didn't like their ceiling. You want to go play for Brooklyn? You want to go play for whoever else has money?
I would just fave the Spurs acting so un-Spurs-like. So I'm going to say the Spurs too. The other De'Aaron Fox stuff. So this would be the flip side of it. Teams are waiting to see, this is per Michael Scotto of Hoop Type, whether the Kings actually make a panic move following the firing of Mike Brown. And this would be, what I find fascinating about this, and Sam Amick adds, like, they've had extensive talks about Cam Johnson with the Nets. And so I think there's 2 questions I want to ask about this, Grant. Let's stick with Fox for a second. If the Kings make a move like this, is it really a panic move, or do you think that it's more so they have a good read on the De'Aaron Fox situation? They don't think that trade request is coming down the pipeline? Because if you think he's going to ask to be traded, I really do think it would take a special brand of stupid to trade future first-round picks.
Right. Well, the Kings have been pretty special.
Speaking of special brand of stupid,
I think that's a good question. I think, like, what does a panic trade even look like for them? Because if it's a sell, that's almost like, good call. Like, if let's get off DeMar DeRozan or something, like, that's, I mean, not that he makes a ton, but it's like that. I don't like the fit. Maybe we should never have liked it. Selling would seem to maybe be the right move, given like some of the tea leaves so far. If it's a buy, like, so Cam Johnson, I don't think would be a panic acquisition.
Well,
unless you're giving up firsts. Yeah. Then it's a little different.
I think what makes it, is it considered a panic move because they can't trade? It would be a conditional 2027 first round pick. Mm-hmm. And that's where it gets, you're not giving up this year's first round pick because that's already technically gone, or maybe you're bad enough that you keep it. But now you've traded a conditional first round pick that, by the way, if it's conditional and you end up being good enough this year, well, now that obligation's extending past 2027.
Yeah. I guess just using Cam Johnson and our like ballpark expected price, that wouldn't feel like a panic trade to me. It might still be dangerous though, because I do think you need to view Fox as a short timer. I think so. Like, if that's the reality, I think you need to be looking to acquire firsts as opposed to giving them up for a good player, but not someone that's like, well, we lost Fox, but we got Cam Johnson anchoring. That's just never going to be the thing.
I would qualify a panic trade with them, and selling is probably like we talk about being proactive. That's the writings on the wall. I would look at it as a buy that costs you even a first round pick at this point. And if it costs more than that, and it's not, because Cam Johnson, you're not getting Cam. I would be shocked if Kevin Huerter, Trey Lyles, and that 2027 pick for Cam Johnson was a deal that Brooklyn accepted. And so now, are they going to throw in Devin Carter? So, like, to me, if you're getting a non-star or like someone who just, fixes everything, and you're giving up, because I can't even say the equivalent of more one first round pick, because a 2027 first round pick that could spill out, that counts as panic to me if the player is not. So their trade, while I do think that they shouldn't, I'm seeing this season through unless De'Aaron Fox says otherwise. Can you get a Jonathan Isaac without giving up? Like, that's probably what they need to look at. And anything else, you could talk me into one asset plus salary for Cam Johnson not being a panic trade. But do you think Cam Johnson's a good fit? What do you think that he does for this team aside, I guess, deepen the rotation of dependable players? Like, what does he do that you think like fixes the Kings?
I mean, he gives you a forward that isn't Keegan Murray, which is the only forward they really have. Like, that's right. He would address a spot of weakness, but like, I think what we've been saying is like the Kings, and I think what Kings fans, it's hard to know now. I think everybody's pretty down, but like a Cam Johnson type acquisition is if you thought Fox, like, he's not going anywhere, Cam Johnson would make sense. Like, he could help them, or someone of that level could help them. But it is a panic move, I think, if you believe Fox is just not someone that's going to be there, which I think, like, let's this is the core question. Like, do you think De'Aaron Fox is on the Kings? Does he sign a new contract or an extension with the Kings?
Not if he doesn't make All NBA.
And even because he's probably not going to give that up. So
have we seen anybody pass on like that? No, right? So
that's, that points towards his own urgency to move, because he's going to want to sign that with somebody else. Right.
I'm saying he can't sign that much. Like, he could get an extension with another team, but the Supermax is only going to come with the Kings.
Do I not know the rule? He can't get it if he makes All NBA this season playing for the Spurs.
No, because you need to be on the team that drafted you, right? Like,
I don't remember.
He's not. Yeah, you do, because he's not. That would be like the veteran extension that he's not eligible for.
Yeah, you're right. That's the whole point of the rule, is to try to keep these guys on the team that drafted him. See, I can't even remember old CBA stuff anymore.
Well, because they introduced too many new CBA things.
That's on me. Anyway, what else we got? We got another team here.
The Toronto Raptors are you.
All right. The future of Jakob Poeltl, a 5-part documentary series.
Knowing us, I wouldn't put it past us.
Mike Scotto says the NBA execs are wondering if Toronto will look to move him. Poeltl does have 2 years and $39 million left on his contract. He has a player option for 26-27. Is a good center. Like, he's a good NBA center, starting caliber.
You're firing off hot takes left and right.
Middle of the pack. Well, it's just like, I don't know if you're talking, like, it seems silly if like executives are wondering if Toronto will move him, talking about like he's Jimmy Butler or whatever. There is like a real conversation to be had because of what he makes and how good he is. Where does Poeltl like solve the problem though? Like, what is there a team out there where he's the answer?
I also look at it and say, I do think he's better than he's more dynamic, I'll say, than these players. But if you can get Vooch or Jonas Valanciunas for a second round pick at a contract you don't want, I'm not looking at Jakob Poeltl. The bigger thing to me is the Raptors don't have like the future of their center position locked down. So why would you move a good player who also, you could say he doesn't fit their timeline. Toronto has this weird open-ended timeline where we haven't seen their full group together basically ever. Manuel quickly just returned. That's great. But they could wind up on a faster track for all we know, just because they have good players there. So I get why executives might be monitoring it, but I'm not. That's a weird thing where I hate that for everybody involved. If I'm Toronto and I get an offer that bowls me, Jakob Poeltl's not untouchable, but why you're not, like, the Bulls should shop Nikola Vucevic for whatever they could get. The Wizards should do that with Jonas Valanciunas. They should not do that with Jakob Poeltl. And if I'm another team, would I prefer to have Jakob Poeltl over this season's version of Nikola Vucevic? Probably, just because there's like a steadier version of Jakob Poeltl there that isn't going to submarine your entire existence that we've sometimes seen with Vooch, but I'm not giving up. Like, why would you trade Jakob Poeltl for a throwaway first-round pick? And then why are you giving up 2 first-round picks for Jakob Poeltl? Show me the team where that would make sense to do. So I hate this for everybody involved. Nobody monitor Jakob Poeltl, not even the Raptors, please.
I think they should trade him to the Spurs for a future first that we get to discuss whether it's going to convey or not for several years. I like to close the loop on things that way.
He's like, of all the players we've talked about, well, who's more likely to get moved, Jakob Poeltl or De'Aaron Fox?
De'Aaron Fox, how about that?
I think I'm with you. Do you have anything else, or do you want to?
No, I think we should stop this immediately. I mean, I regret nothing. Those 40 minutes were a good part of my day.
Magical.
Thanks everybody for listening, for watching. Come up with more Jimmy Butler teams that we didn't, even though we did roughly half the league so far. I'm sure there are more teams willing to take on $50 million for a 35-year-old. Remember, if you haven't, rate, review, subscribe wherever you're listening to your podcast. If you're watching this on YouTube, make sure you give us a thumbs up, leave some comments. Make sure you're subscribed there. Tell your friends. Word of mouth really helps. Tell your enemies. And I think that's going to cover it. Trade deadline, a little over a month away. So exciting times. Shouts Frank Ntilikina. Apologies, Jared Allen.